Welcome to Providence Anglican Channel, sharing with you tonight from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 6, which is the Sermon on the Mount. First, let me tell you a brief story, kind of catch your attention. There was a couple who had planned a trip to New York City for one of the big movies, and I forget whether it was Cats or Les Mis, but it was one of those shows that everyone who was anyone felt that they had to see. Well, the day came for the movie, or for the show, that is, and the seats were filling up like crazy. There was a woman in one row, and next to her there was an empty seat, and then in the next seat over there was a chap sitting, and he kept looking over at that empty seat and wondering why there was nobody in it. Finally, he couldn't help but mention it to the woman across that space from him. He said, this show has been sold out for a couple of months. I just can't believe that nobody's in this seat. The show's about to begin. And the woman said, well, I can explain that. She said, my husband and I planned to attend this show many months ago. We ordered our tickets and made our airplane reservations and arranged everything so we could be here. But unfortunately, my husband passed away, and so that's why the seat is empty. Well, the other fellow wasn't quite satisfied with that. He said, well, couldn't you have invited any children you could have invited, or relatives, sister-in-law, or somebody? And she said, no, I'm afraid they are all at the funeral. Well, that was one woman who understood what her priorities were. She was going to be in her seat at that play, regardless of what else happened. Even the funeral of her husband could not prevent her from being there. And that's kind of a silly introduction to today's text in Matthew 6. We're looking at verses 24 through 34. And here Jesus talks about priorities. He says, no one can serve two masters. He will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Well, do you see here that Jesus gives first a general principle, and then he makes that general principle specifically applicable in the religious dimension of life? The generality is that no man can serve two masters. It does away with the definition of the word master if two different people are master over you at the same time. And Jesus gives kind of he uses language here that I think is not readily understandable to the average modern person, at least in the West, because when he says you'll either love the one and despise the other, we cannot help but think of kind of love as that affectionate feeling we have toward a boyfriend or a girlfriend, a husband or a wife, or at least it's an emotional attachment that we have to someone like our brother or sister, or even a pet. But Jesus does not mean that if you have two masters that you are literally going to hate one, that you're literally going to despise one of them. I don't think that could possibly be what Jesus means. I myself have at times had any number of different jobs. But let's say when I was in my late 20s, I had one job that was my main job. It was the job that I did Monday through Friday. And then I had a friend whose family had a business, and they needed someone to work on the evenings, Friday night and Saturday. And I would work all week at my real job, and then I would literally moonlight from around 9 p.m. on Friday night to 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, and then I would do the same again on Saturday night. I'd come home and head off to church, and then Monday morning go back to my regular job. Well, listen, I didn't hate either of the bosses who signed my paychecks. However, what was true was this, that if my regular employer, my Monday through Friday employer, had told me, I need you Friday night to be at work, I would have been there and not at my moonlighting job. And that's what Jesus means. He doesn't mean that I literally, emotionally hate the other employer, but I would despise him in the sense that I value him way below my primary employer. And so it would be impossible for me to really, literally call them both boss, because only one really was my master at that time. And so the general idea is no one can have two masters. But now Jesus makes that much more specific and applies it to our religious life. And he says, you, yes, you, believer, follower of the Messiah, you cannot serve God and money. You cannot have them both as masters. And, well, this is true. You may have heard this quaint little saying, money makes a fine servant, but a poor master. And that is certainly a truism. But Jesus is going deeper than that. He's going in a slightly different direction. And what he's really aiming at is, what is your priority? Who do you really love in the sense of being fully committed to that person or to that thing? And he's saying it cannot be both God and money. By the way, money in the New Testament, the English Standard Version is usually a very word-for-word translation. In this case, the word that they translate money is not literally money. It's a word, mammon. And we don't need to go into the entire etymology of mammon. It's enough to say this, that mammon can mean money, but it means more than money. It really means money or the things that money can buy. Many years ago, I watched a rags to riches to rags story. And during the course of that movie, there came a point where the husband and wife who had been poor and then vastly wealthy were now becoming poor again because something had gone wrong with the invention that had made them rich, and everyone was suing them for a problem with it. And as their furniture is being carried out, they're kind of having their last meal at their table, and the wife says to the husband, "It's not so much the money that I'll miss," and then she begins to cry. "It's just all the stuff." And that's what mammon is. It is all the stuff. You cannot serve both material accumulation, material pursuits, and also God. One will dominate, the other will inevitably take a distant second place. Now, just before these verses, Jesus has already been talking about material possessions, and he says, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. And what Jesus is aiming at is for us to really make our investment in heavenly things, to invest in other people, to help the poor, to put money in the box at church that helps to carry the gospel forward, and to accomplish the things that truly last. And what he's saying there is that material things are unreliable. I remember distinctly the year that I had my white preaching collar. It was all around the neck, and I had noticed that some priests would wear a nice, soft, black, kind of crew-necked sweater, and then the collar would show up nicely along the top of that sweater. And I thought I'd like to have one of those, and I eventually told Nancy, I guess, and she got me one, and it was made of the softest wool imaginable. And I'll never forget the day that I took it out and put it on, and there were a whole bunch of moth holes in it. My beautiful, beautiful sweater had been fretted by the moths. That is, they had chewed holes in it. And Jesus is saying, the things that you can accumulate in this world are unreliable. I had purchased George and his friend and my good friend a set of looked to be handmade knives, and they were of a type of steel called Damascus steel, which is folded over and over and over again and hammered out until it becomes very, very hard. And I was so happy with these gifts, and I gave them each their own gift. Each knife had a different color wood in its handle, but they were all identical knives. And when they pulled them out of the sheaths, to my absolute horror, some of them had become rusty, just between the time that I had purchased them and the time that I gave them away. And Jesus is saying, nothing in this life stays nice. Nothing stays perfect. And so don't store up for yourselves treasures here on earth where moth and rust corrupt, or where thieves break through and steal. I remember very well when Nancy and I first lived in New York City, and what happened there was just what people who are not from New York City expect would happen there. Someone snuck in the back of our house by pushing an air conditioner in through its shaft, and they climbed in through the opening where the wall unit slid into the brick wall. And I never, ever had imagined that you could get in that way. The windows had bars. There was a fence around the yard. There were many gates and locks to come through in the front of the house. But the thieves found the one weakness in the whole design of the place. And what did they take? All of my wife's jewelry gone, and the house trashed. What if we had been counting on those jewels and gold and silver things for security against an economic downturn or something? well, that would have been a very poorly placed confidence, because the thieves came in and took all of those things away. So Jesus moves then from the unreliability of material possessions and the logical wisdom of putting your things in the kingdom of heaven, where they will be safe for eternity. And then he moves on to the principle that we can only serve one master, and it had better be God himself, because it will either be God or it will be stuff. May I say in closing that this is why in the economy of the Old Testament, the Sabbath day and the tithe were so important, because both the Sabbath day and the tithe pressed home this question: who is your master? Who do you love? Who's your master, and who do you love? The other nations went 7 days a week. They didn't have a Sabbath day. God told the Jews to stop, and so you have this scene in the Old Testament. One day the merchants have gathered at the temple gates, and they want to come into the city square and sell their goods, or perhaps to stay outside the gate and sell their goods, as they still do in Jerusalem. If you've ever gone to Jerusalem, and all the women have their blankets spread out, and the almonds and the cashews and the freshly baked bread are all spread out there, and you can purchase them as you go into the city. And, I think it was Ezra the priest went out and said, pack these things up. This city will not be open for business. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow is the Sabbath day. And, who do you rely on? If you are relying on mammon, then you go 7 days a week, because you need to pay those bills, feed those children, make the payments on your house and motorboat, and automobile. In those days, they're camel, I guess, or the donkey. What happens when you stop working? Well, everybody else gets ahead of you. All the other nations get ahead of you, don't they, when you stop on the Sabbath day? Interesting, though. We have one fast food chain here that closes on the Christian Sabbath, which is the Lord's Day, Sunday. It's called Chick-fil-A. And my family loves Chick-fil-A. I don't know if it's that great, but some time back we had gone to Sight and Sound down in Lancaster County, and we wanted to grab a quick bite to eat. And at Burger King there were no cars and no customers. But across the street at Chick-fil-A, they had 2 takeout lines with cars lined up halfway down the side of the building. 2 lines, not just one. And I thought, my oh my, this company is doing terrific business. But they close on Sunday. It looks to me like they're making enough the rest of the week to make up for Sunday. Well, what was the idea of not working 1 day out of 7? The idea was not just who's your master, not just who do you love, but upon whom do you rely for your sustenance. And God wanted the Hebrews to know that while, yes, they worked their farms, and yes, they opened their shops, and yes, they sold their merchandise, but ultimately their provider was the Lord. And He is the ultimate source of every good thing that we have. And so the Sabbath day demonstrated that you depended upon the Lord. The tithe does the same thing. You get that money in your hand, or in the old days you got your crop into the barn, and you feel that you need every penny or every kernel and taking 10% of it and setting it aside and giving it straight to the Lord, or giving it to the poor at the temple. I mean, this is crazy. The rest of the nations keep 100% of what they get for themselves, and we're to give 10% away? How will we live? Well, you will live by depending on God. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. That's what the Torah says, and that's what Jesus repeated in the New Testament. Man does not live by mammon alone, you might say. It's not the stuff that sustains us, it's the Lord who sustains us through the stuff that he gives us. And he does provide for us. Jesus gives two examples of encouragement. After he gets done with his talk about money, he immediately follows it with, don't be anxious. I reckon that some of you may be anxious. Listen to this. Jesus says, don't be anxious. Look at the birds and look at the lilies. Don't be anxious for what you eat or what you drink, how you're going to get it. And don't be anxious about what you need to wear, your clothing. Because the birds don't have any fields, they don't have any silos, but God feeds them, and you're more important than birds. And look at the lilies of the field. They don't have a spinning machine or a sewing machine or knitting needles or any of those things. And yet Solomon, the most glorious king, the richest king that is in Israel's history, he was not arrayed as beautifully as the lilies in the field. And then at the end, Jesus reminds them who their God is. You see, the nations worshipped gods that didn't really know them and that didn't really know anything. I mean, their